A lot of times you can think that what the left is doing is outrageous. It is, and that it's chaotic. It isn't. And a good friend and mentor of mine, Dennis Prager, who was so wonderful and so brilliant, I remember asking him in earnest years ago, sitting across from him, what are they doing? One day they're screaming at bathroom signs. One day they're marching out of school protesting climate change. What the heck are they doing? Like, are they on drugs? And the answer to that is probably yes. But also, he said to me, it's just chaos. You can't understand it. But actually, I spent time thinking about that, and I think it's wrong. And I offer back to him now that they're ever intentional, it's Machiavellian, and it's methodical. And the method behind their madness is that all of these things represent an attack on family. And when you start to see things through that lens and revisit those topics, you will realize that everything they do is to attack family. That is the push for the LGBTQIA. All of those initiatives, teaching people to mutilate their bodies, telling people to pursue same-sex couples and same-sex marriages, putting children on drugs that are irreversible. Those people are not going to grow up and to be able to have productive nuclear families. When you look at the climate change lobby, what they are encouraging children in classrooms is saying that it would be irresponsible for you to grow up and start a family. Notoriously, Meghan and Harry received an award for agreeing to only have 2 kids. It's about the shrinking of family, telling them it's the eco-friendly thing to do to either not have a family altogether or to limit how big of a family that you actually have. You look at transgenderism, of course, we touched upon that. Every single topic that the left is after, feminism, telling women to act like men, not to be at home, to climb the corporate ladder, telling men to act like women. Everything is an attack on family. And then you start to recast it and you realize, of course, because the thing that stands between the government and complete and utter omnipotence is family, right? If you are the government and you want to be the God and the family in people's life, then there can be no God. Mock Christians, celebrate atheism, celebrate sex culture, celebrate women dancing on stage half naked, display the Kardashians all the time, denigrate women by telling them that you're empowering women, right? Break down the family structure and break down religion, and then you will become the new religion. And the biggest example of that for me, and I still am traumatized for what I saw during COVID, people on their hands and knees begging the government to deliver them one more day. It was an experiment, a human experiment, and we failed.
We failed in a lot of ways, but Candace, you didn't fail. And
no, I didn't fail. I passed with flying colors.
No, but that is correct. And I was against the lockdowns from the beginning, and I was attacked from every possible direction. The lockdowns will go down as one of the worst mistakes in human history.
But academics said that it was going to be great.
Though that goes to the core point right here before we do some questions, which I hope an academic will ask a question, which is the experts. We were told to trust the experts. You see, the problem with trusting the experts is it's not about trusting scientists. It's not science. It's about the scientists they like. Dr. Anthony Fauci did more damage to Generation Z than almost any person. That man should be in prison for the rest of his life.
So I am involved with Greek life at my school, and the culture that is currently being promoted is that you hook up with random dudes and then you can go and get that baby gone. What do you think we should do as college students to prevent that culture from continuing to build and build?
Well, first, praise God for your moral clarity. Hookup culture is awful, and it's especially awful for women. It actually makes women very miserable because men and women view sex differently. Women do not view sex as transactional as men do. It's a very personal and emotional experience. And when they start to have sex with a lot of men, it actually leaves them psychologically damaged and broken. And that is a fact that we're seeing manifest of a generation of young women that think that they can participate in a hookup culture and they get a lot happier. And they're actually the most miserable they've ever been. The second thing is this: we have to educate that is a human being. You're not just going to go get plastic or cosmetic surgery. I ask people sometimes, how many abortions do you think happen in America every single year? I got an answer at a recent campus event. They said, about 20,000. It's 1 million. I know, takes people breaths away, right? There's 3,000 abortions a day in America. That's not good for anybody. And nobody likes to say this out loud, and the people in Highland Park will scream at you if you say this, but abortion has become a type of birth control as a last chance measure. Do you agree with that? That people look at abortion that way?
Yeah, I mean, personally, my mom had me at 21. She was a young adult living in the city, and she made the choice to keep me.
Praise God she made that choice, by the way.
I come from a place where it's like, she raised me. She took ownership of her actions and raised me to be a great young woman. So I can only imagine that if more young women take that step, what this society could be.
So there's two things. It's not just the woman that needs to take responsibility for their actions. It's the man that needs to take responsibility for their actions too. And these weak men, I could go on and on and on about how awful that whole culture is. But you said something important. Take responsibility. We have a generation that prioritizes pleasure over duty. One of the reasons we're in the mess that we're in is we want to do what feels good over what is right. And the abortion industry hinges on an entire flawed moral argument that my temporary orgasm matters more than a baby being able to live in this world. Nobody wants to say that out loud, but that is exactly what drives the abortion industry. We need to educate people that you might have done something you regret, you might not have been proud of yourself, but terminating another human being because you made a mistake is not good for you, and it's not good for them, and it's not good for society. Thank you for your moral clarity, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So as someone who claims to be such a bastion of freedom of speech, why do you call the protesters outside terrorists, outside of, say, one broken window?
Well, it's more than one broken window. Assaulting cops, spray painting, the death threats that they throw at me, the violent intimidation, the graffiti.
But that's not, don't you think it's bigoted to call all protesters who are outside as terrorists when a handful of minority might be representing some
Wait, why would it be bigoted?
activities?
They're mostly white liberals without jobs.
Sorry?
Why is it bigoted? They're mostly white liberals without jobs.
But you're calling all protesters terrorists?
I'm calling Antifa out there that are anonymizing their identity, sending death threats to my family, smashing windows, and spray painting the campus the entire week leading up to this terrorist. Yes, I absolutely stand by that.
But so that wouldn't. A lot of them are just college students who don't agree with the point of view that you're propagating.
Well, maybe
today.
they should have come to the front of the line and asked a question like you, and not acted like somebody in a third world country where they settle their differences with gang violence.
But just to be sure, those people who are there to register their protest aren't terrorists.
Okay, the terrorist definition is a person who uses unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians, in the pursuit of political aims. Did they do that?
I don't think so.
Wait, hold on. A person who unlawfully violent, window smashing, graffiti, assault
Not
against
all of
police
them.
officers.
Not
Okay.
all of them.
Hold on a second. The leaders, they cover for themselves. And by the way, only a small of them are isolated, and they're all in one big black block. And don't try to gaslight the people here or the people watching online. There's hundreds of them. They're working in a coordinated network with coordinated tactics. And these are not just quote-unquote college kids. There's obviously somebody behind this with funding and sophistication, with quasi-paramilitary tactics. And let me ask you a question. Why is it that when people go into the United States Capitol and take a selfie, they're called terrorists by our government, but when you start to terrorize and smash windows and put violent threats and death threats to me, it's somehow bigoted to call them terrorists?
So first of all, it wasn't a coordinated effort. As someone who was there, I just knew that there was this event happening and that there would be a protest in order to register our point of view. I was not part of any coordinated effort, and neither were a lot of the other people who were there. We don't appreciate the label of being terrorist, especially a lot of us are from countries where
you shouldn't appreciate the
so.
label or the activity. Why don't you come here and say, I'm pretty damn embarrassed that people that agree with me resort to violence instead of going up here and trying to lecture me about calling them terrorists?
Absolutely. But this isn't about...
You're making a fool of yourself. Why don't you go out and talk to your buddies and tell them to stop trying to shut down our event?
So I don't know why your response is always a whataboutism. I mean, I'm just asking
It's not.
if you
I'm
take
asking
back
questions
that they're not
you can't
terrorists.
answer-ism.
What? I've answered each of your questions. I'm just saying.
No,
that
let me ask you a
not
question.
Everyone is part
let
of
me
a
ask you a question.
coordinate
Will you publicly condemn the violence done in the political spirit outside by the people that you were protesting alongside? Will you do that right now?
It depends what you're referring to.
Smashing of windows and
I don't
assaulting
think
police officers.
breaking windows is a good idea.
Assaulting
But
police officers. Do you condemn
no one
that?
assaulted police officers.
You what?
I was there. No one assaulted police
That's
officers.
lie.
I
That's
was
not
there.
true. Throwing eggs and objects at police officers is a legal definition of assault, no matter how much you try to gaslight it or spin it.
If I can just, without resorting to whataboutism, using your definition of terrorism, if the police uses unjust violence against civilians, should that also count as terrorism?
Absolutely not. But first of all, your definition of unjust.
I'm just taking your definition of
No.
terrorism.
Let me read this again. Unlawful violence and intimidation, especially against civilians in the pursuit of political aims. Antifa doesn't just do this here. They did this in Sacramento and assaulted one of our Turning Point USA employees
I'm not Antifa.
and sent one of them to the hospital. Antifa, oh, by the way, the same buddies, the same tactics, the same coordination, the same wardrobe, the same language, the same signs. You know what they did 2 weeks ago? They arson and firebombed an entire police training headquarters in Georgia in massive coordinated fashion. And so right now what we are seeing is the rise of left-wing domestic violent extremism, and the failure to acknowledge or admit it means that you are blinded by ideology. Thank you for being here tonight. We'll get to the next one.
I feel like the hardest thing is, yes, being shut down for having that opposing viewpoint, but moreover, when it comes to things like Black History Month, I feel like we as conservatives especially feel like we have to tiptoe around that stuff. Like, that's the left's arena. Like, they can only show this type of narrative. They can't show Black history truthfully for what it was. They can't highlight people that actually, like,
it's
were
because
prominent
fake
in
claims of racism have way too much power in this country, and people need to learn to stand up and not to shy away from somebody calling them a racist when they know that they factually are not. And it's been a major problem in conservative circles, is that it holds so much power, especially in post-BLM America. And it's fraudulent. It's given too much power to people. The idea that a Black person needs to run into a Target and grab a flat screen TV because another Black person got killed by a police officer. What? I'm sorry. Like I said, everybody's acting like a criminal. Everyone's acting like a toddler. And the problem is that these people are not being parented correctly. You know, the people are being told by corporations that it's okay, that they want to act like criminals and act like animals when somebody dies. And so part of the change is conservatives bucking up and having the spine to realize that sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt you. If you are not a racist and someone calls you one, you need to not be impacted by that statement.
Why are we putting up with 11-year-olds getting hysterectomies?
I would say there's two elements of this. The first, you accurately define social contagion. Of course, we are the generation of social media. When I grew up, there was no social media. That sounds so crazy. People are like, what do you mean? What did you do? I don't know. We spoke to each other. We played outside. Wild, I know. But there was no social media, and I thank God that I was born in a time where we were able to live in reality and not in fiction, where people are creating avatars of themselves and where people are essentially doing more and more extreme things for attention. And this is a huge part of this. I unpacked this on my podcast, how psychiatrists were talking about seeing people that didn't actually have the disorders that they claimed to have, but they were mimicking the disorders because it gave them a sense of community online, right? They called these pseudo disorders, right? So rather than the real thing, like years ago, you would actually have a person that suffered from gender dysphoria, which was legally, when I was growing up, we learned about it in the DSM-5 as a mental disorder. Now you're seeing kids that just think it's cool. They're watching Dylan Mulvaney on TikTok, and they go, I want to identify with this community, so they're pretending to be trans because it gets them an instant community. And ultimately what we're talking about is a spiritual emptiness, right? Kids have never, we call it social media. It's actually the most antisocial thing in the entire world, to hold up your phone and talk to yourself, right? And kids are spending more and more time getting a dopamine kick from likes, and they don't know. When they're done getting that like, they need to feel that high again. It's quite literally a drug. And so an element of that is that we have a generation of children that are addicted to the drug that social media has become, that can't go back in their memory to a time when it didn't exist. And what we're seeing are symptoms of that. People that just literally want attention, need a hug, need spiritual fulfillment, and they're never, ever, ever going to get it by being more extreme, by saying saying you're trans, well, cis is that us? I don't know. There's so many terms now. It's weird. What is cis?
Cis? I think we're cis.
Are we cis?
We're cis.
Okay.
Cisgender.
Do we call each other like cis?
I don't think so.
Okay, well,
No, but
I can't learn.
I think cisgender
what's
is.
zer?
What is zer?
What is zer?
I think those are pronouns for low IQ people
that
are too afraid to
like
engage in reality.
I think
Z and zer and zim and
and zim. What is that?
Though that's what pronouns that people put in their email signature. Whenever I see pronouns in an email signature, you know what it is? It says, I went to college, I have a lot of student debt, I'm miserable, and acknowledge how good of a person I am.
Oh, mine is like, you're not even getting hired, so just delete.
No, I mean, it is the ultimate deterrent not to work at Turning Point USA.
Well, they're saying this now. Forget just Turning Point USA and conservative organizations. I don't remember whether it was the Washington Post, but it was a left-leaning publication that wrote an article saying that people that put their pronouns on their resumes are not getting hired. And I went, gee, I wonder why.
You're going to be the first one to go to the HR department, the first one to complain.
Why don't you just write, I'm stupid on your resume?
Yes.
It's completely crazy.
Yeah, watch. They're going to file some sort of discrimination lawsuit. I mean, is pronoun declaration a protected class? I don't think that's a protected class.
No, it is not a protected class just yet, but it's driving people crazy.
But
my main question was about the term eradicate transgenderism.
So can I give you some examples?
Yeah, sure.
We shouldn't teach it in our schools. We also shouldn't allow men to compete against women in NCAA sports. Okay.
What about the people who are transgender that have converted, are currently transgender?
This? So why
would you forcefully detransition them?
Yeah, how
what's the
about
plan?
why couldn't Thomas still compete against men despite his mental delusion? Why do we have to reaccommodate all female sports for a single individual that obviously has an advantage with bone density and testosterone production? Why is it now our problem? Why does society have to reorganize and reconfigure for one very loud, obviously disturbed person? Wouldn't it be more fair to say, okay, you have a problem, so keep competing in the category that you were born to? You can still wear whatever you want, I guess, and dress and do the treatments you want, but since you're such an excellent swimmer, go swim against boys. Oh, because he's a narcissist and he used to finish 200 against boys, and when he competes against girls, he wins the championship because he's a cheat. Because it's all about him, not about the competition or about fairness.
What happens if you get high on feminism? Because it can happen, right? It's fine, I think, if you're in college. Like, I was a little high on feminism. Yay, feminism, yay. Picture with all my girls. We're just like Taylor Swift. Okay, fine. Totally fine for a day or two. When you get out of college, you better drop that drug down, let me tell you real quick, because I'll never forget a woman that commented under a discussion that I had with Dennis Prager on an old show of mine. And we were talking about the lies of modern feminism. We were talking about what happens if you don't put down that drug. And if you go in and you give up your best years pursuing something that's never going to fulfill you in the way that family will. And a woman commented and she said, thank you so much, Candace, for having this discussion with women. I wish I could go back and do things differently in my life. I'm now 54, I have no children, and I take pills to make me happy, right? I have to take psychiatric pills to keep me happy every day, because I just thought that being a feminist, I thought that feminism was right for too long, and women need to wake up. That is the truth for everybody. Family is fulfilling. Family is what makes you happy at the end of the day.
Some people on the left will say, but black people can't be racist. This is a predominant prevailing view. Or they say, well, white people are racist no matter what. When basically the classical definition of racism is one that we should not just accept, it should be predominant, which is any person of any race could be racist at any time. It's wrong and it's evil. And guess what? We're actually not that racist of a country. We're actually the least racist country ever to exist in the history of the world. We're actually rather decent to each other. Considering we have every nation represented on the planet, every language spoken, we've let more people into our country than any other country ever to exist in the history of the world, and we largely get along. That's a big deal. In fact, we have a supply and demand problem with racism. That if you are a famous, soon-to-be failed actor in Chicago, you have to fake your own hate crime. There's so little racism that you got to go all of a sudden put like a noose around your neck and act as if, oh my goodness, they're hunting me down in the streets and screaming, this is MAGA country.
That's how you know you don't live in a racist country. You have to fake your own hate crimes. And by the way, you do it really sloppily and you think people are going to believe you. By the way, I'm from Chicago. I knew this whole thing was BS as soon as I heard negative 30 degrees. You go out to Subway, that's really weird, at like 2 a.m. Like that whole thing is really strange. And then he says that the two people come up with MAGA hats and proclaim this is MAGA country. And then they throw the noose around him. And then when the police come back into his apartment, he's still wearing the noose. And the police officer, God bless him, he's one of the funniest lines in the history of police body cam footage. First thing the police officer says is, "Why are you still wearing the noose?" It's like been 20 minutes. Like I get it. It's like, don't you think you take it off? Like you're wearing it like it's a costume, because it was a costume. Okay. I have to talk about this Sacramento Bee story. You guys fans of the Sacramento Bee around here? You know, it's just hard to believe who actually funds these papers, right? So this writer, who I don't know if she's a nice person or not, but she's a total liar, Hannah Holzer, it's hilarious. She says here, first she says, another fascist speaker is coming to UC Davis. How should the community respond? Opinion in the Sacramento Bee. So fascist speaker, I don't know who she's talking about, because tonight you're going to see that anyone who disagrees with me tonight is not just allowed, but is encouraged to go ask a question. I would be the worst fascist in the history of government if you allow people that disagree with you to go to the front of the line and challenge you with an open mic. So I don't know who she's talking about. You know who the fascists are? The people outside using violence to try to shut us up. Those are the violent. Those are the fascists outside. So Hannah Holzer writes this for the Sacramento Bee. And this is, look, I get lied about all the time, and the result is death threats and violence and all that. I could deal with it. What bothers me, though, is every so often one of you have to be the recipient of this propaganda campaign. And you don't have a platform like I do. You don't have a podcast like I do to be able to punch back and actually set the record straight. They come after people that aren't as big or as strong as the newspapers are, and they try to crush you. And in fact, they do this to try to chill all your speech at your workplace, in your family, to try to make a public example of it. And they just flat out lie. So Hannah Holzer writes in the Sacramento Bee, she writes a lot of stuff, but one paragraph in particular. She says this: Kirk has called for the lynching of trans people. A comment, this is in the Sacramento Bee, a comment that is beneath contempt. That is a lie. I have never done that. I have never thought that. There is zero evidence of that. In fact, it originated by some Twitter account, by some trans activist that saw a segment of mine where I said, quote, in the 50s or 60s, we would not have put up with men going into female locker rooms. That was the quote. And by the way, it's totally true, because the district attorney would have arrested men going into female locker rooms for being a pervert. And I said that. She says, Charlie Kirk is calling for the lynching of trans people. I've never said it. I've never alluded to it. In fact, I've always been clear about peaceful activism. But instead, the Sacramento Bee writes this. The Sacramento Bee publishes this. And if they could do it to me, they're going to do it to all of you. They're going to do this to every single good, God-loving patriot in this country to try to smear you and slander you.
Why are we seeing more and more of this, of young children that are buying into the idea that their world is going to end in 10 years. And let me tell you something, by the way, if you are someone who believes this, you just need to speak to people that are from different generations, because we were all told we were going to die in 10 years, and in very different catastrophic ways, in the ways that you are being told today. When I was a kid, we were forced to sit in a classroom and watch Al Gore tell us an inconvenient truth. And in this movie that we were all forced to watch, which was very scary, by the way, at the time, they showed us images of polar bears drowning in the ocean. I'm serious. I'm very serious. They were these images that they created, not real images, of polar bears drowning in the ocean. And they said, in 10 years, your planet's going to be over unless you do something. And that something is give the government money. Global warming was the name of the game when I was in school. Now, just a little fun update. The polar bear population has gone up since then, and they no longer talk about global warming because in 2011, rather inconveniently, the temperature started dropping, not warming. So they said, okay, never mind, we're not going to talk about it anymore. We're not going to talk about global warming. Forget the phrase. Let's not even talk about it. Talk to your generation before you, and they were told they were all going to be dead in 10 years because of global cooling. The exact opposite scare. I was incredulous talking to my parents. I was like, no, what they didn't say. Yeah, no, they told them that it was going to get so cold in 10 years. They love 10 years. It's a nice round number. It feels good. It feels like you can play that number in a lottery, right? In 10 years, unless you do something, the earth is going to cool and it's all going to freeze. And something that you can do is hand over more power and money to the government. But then that didn't happen, so they moved on. If you talk to generations before that, there was acid rain. They were told the oceans were going to become so acidic and it was going to rain, and I don't know, were they going to perish and burn? I'm not sure what was going to happen there. But that was another pitch. There was the ozone hole, the ozone layer. I mean, every generation, they spend time telling children that they're all going to die.
I think you're actually more conservative than you are liberal, than you give yourself credit for.
No. Hold your applause. I am not, because where we differ is in how we define what is profane, what is pornography.
How about oral sex to 8-year-olds? That's probably profane, right?
Excuse me?
Yeah, exactly. That's in textbooks across the country, including in this state, that liberals are defending as free speech.
Okay.
They're teaching 8-year-olds the most graphic sexual practices in public schools across the country. And I get smeared, slandered, and so does the American right, as somehow being anti-LGBT, because I don't think a 9-year-old should be exposed to things that should be behind in the darkest depths of the human existence, right? So I guess we agree on that. What I'm trying to get at, though, is why you believe what you believe. And we could spend all night doing this. You say you believe in freedom and free speech, right? Okay. So which side do you think the American right or the American left currently is doing a better job of protecting the idea of freedom of speech?
Actually, they're both sucking pretty hardcore. They're both being absolutely horrible at it.
How has the right been horrible at that? I'm curious.
They're both being horrible in the exact same way. And it's, who are they protecting or standing up for free speech for? Like, free speech for who?
Can I ask a theoretical question? Do you think if a liberal came to speak at University of Kentucky, they'd give an open mic like I just did to a conservative and had a discussion like this?
I certainly hope they would.
No, they wouldn't, because speech is not a left-wing value. That's why Chuck Schumer went on the Senate floor yesterday and called for the censorship of a cable television program. That is why they have to deploy shock troops called Antifa to go after everywhere I go. When I go to University of California, Davis next week, there has to be 120 police officers because of the threats, the violent threats of liberals that want me dead, that want to disrupt our events. There are no right-wing hecklers that come to events like this. Michael Knowles, Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, myself, Candace Owens need 24/7, 365 armed security to prevent ourselves from the violent threats from the left. And so I think it's rather clear there's one side that is trying to do everything they can to shut one side up, and one side that's trying to open up the marketplace of ideas. And I think that's rather self-evident. But I do want to thank you for coming here tonight and demonstrating.
I totally disagree with everything you just said. I don't discount that you've received death threats or anything like that.
So how about this? Public approval polls show that a majority of liberals do not believe the First Amendment is absolute. What do you have to say about that?
It's not absolute. There are restrictions to the First Amendment.
Such as?
There literally are legal restrictions to it.
Outside of incitement, what would one be?
Okay, let's see. Let me think
high
school civics class.
Do you think hate speech should be disallowed?
Fighting words is disallowed. Not fighting word. It's called that though.
No, they're very much not disallowed, actually.
They are disallowed if your speech is considered by a reasonable person and they harm you because of what you said.
Wait, you mean hurt their feelings or physically harm them?
No, okay. If you intentionally provoke a person with your speech, that is not protected speech.
Yes, it is.
It actually...
The American Civil Liberties Union protected to be able to march in Skokie, Illinois around Holocaust survivors. Grotesque, outrageous speech is absolutely protected by the First Amendment.
I'm not saying that grotesque. I'm saying that... I can't really explain it right now, But there is a limitation on that. Another limit is like you can't speech that like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
You actually can, but that's a separate constitutional issue. That's incitement. That's a separate issue. But thank you for being here tonight. And I don't think we made any progress, but we certainly see where we disagree. So.